friends and I have been going through a bit of a film phase, and when the Oscar nominations came out, I thought we should watch all of the Best Picture nominations and major categories because I'd only seen Wicked. Even now, I've only seen Wicked, Anora, and The Substance, the girly pop nominees. And I might watch the other ones at some point, but I'm not particularly interested in watching them now. But if someone wrote a passionate comment about one of the other movies is their fave, I would love to hear it and maybe give it a chance. But today we're going to be talking about my best picture of 2024, Carolee Fraja's body horror thriller film, The Substance. The Substance is definitely not a movie I would normally watch, and I probably wouldn't really want to watch The Substance again. It was very thought-provoking and terrifying, and definitely an experience. Before we get into the movie, I do want to talk about the triggering horror elements of it, because this movie would definitely trigger misophonia and trypophobia, and basically any other thing that could happen to your body that you think is gross. But I will say for my review, I'm not going to go too much into those elements. I'm going to talk about them a bit, but I don't think I'm going to show any of them on screen. I might show some screen caps, but nothing too crazy, because I have to edit this video. I don't want to look at it if it's too crazy. So please join me as we deconstruct the feminist horror, The Substance. Demi Moore stars as the lead character Elizabeth Sparkle, who is an aging film star and now a aerobics TV host. But the show's gross producer, Harvey, played by Dennis Quaid, fires her in hopes of finding a newer, younger starlet for the show. He fires her in the most revolting and crunching way. He's overindulging in seafood without manners, firing a woman for being too old when he's probably older than she is, while she sits politely. We also get another gross scene of him, and it's POV, you're the bathroom wall, watching him pee while he's yelling at someone on the phone. Elizabeth lives in an almost cartoonish world, and she's constantly being reminded of her appearance. The hallway in the studio she works at is covered with pictures of her, and when driving home she sees a billboard of herself being taken down, and her distraction, watching the billboard be taken down, leads to a bad car accident. We cut to her in the hospital after being taken in for the car accident, and she seems to have gotten away unscathed. We also learn it's her 50th birthday, and she starts to break down and cry. This mysterious, handsome nurse hands Elizabeth a flash drive with the message, "It changed my life," and The Substance is written on the flash drive. So she goes home to watch The Substance's pitch video for this new black market product, The Substance. A black market drug that promises a younger, more beautiful, more perfect version of yourself. They basically describe it as a cell dividing into two, but those two separate parts are still one part of a whole. And Elizabeth, not really seeing the appeal in it, decides to throw it away in the trash. Elizabeth also has a gigantic portrait of herself in her living room, another reminder of her appearance. After a night of drinking, she goes home and throws a snow globe at the portrait of herself, shattering the glass. And after this low point, she fishes the Substance flash drive out of the trash and calls a number on it. She is given instructions to go to a locker, and she gets a key card in the mail. It's in a shady alley with a broken garage door, but you can tell it's the right place because they have a double play button looking logo in neon yellow. And the room that the Substance lockers are in is unlike anything else in the garage. It's a stark, completely clean white room with about 18 lockers in it. She's number 503, and she gets her package. Then she goes home and does a Substance unboxing, and she finds out how it truly works. You activate, you get stabilizer from your original body, and you switch every 7 days. And you have to remember, you are one. Elizabeth stares at her naked body in the mirror, dissecting and ridiculing it before deciding to activate the Substance. It is a radioactive green color liquid that she injects. After injecting it, she immediately starts to writhe on the bathroom floor. This is one of the more disturbing scenes in the movie where Elizabeth births a new self through her spine. There's also a part where Elizabeth has two eyes in her eyeball. Terrifying. I don't have trypophobia, but maybe I do after seeing that. So Elizabeth wakes up in this new body, and she immediately goes to the mirror to admire herself, leaving her old self to bleed out on the bathroom tiles. She then somewhat crudely sutures Elizabeth's back wound. This part was actually even worse than the birthing scene for me because the needle's going through the skin. Crazy gross. I just kept thinking, it's not real. It's a prop. It's not real. It's not real. But that kind of didn't help because it looks so much like skin. And she also gives Elizabeth her food matrix, which is 7 days worth of substance when she's unconscious. One of the most critical steps stabilizing because Sue is feeling unwell when she wakes up and realizes she needs the stabilization fluid from Elisabeth. So she takes a syringe and withdraws 7 days worth of fluid from her back wound. How Elisabeth knows to do this, I'm not sure because it's not in the instruction. Every day in the new body, she has to inject herself with substance from the other side. So now with this younger self, Elisabeth is ready to get her job back. She saw a listing in the newspaper for who wants to be the next Elisabeth Sparkles and goes to the audition. She auditions in the room alone with 2 misogynistic white men, and she has a new makeover and becomes Sue. So Sue immediately gets the attention of the network, and Harvey fills her with promises and praise. We also see a lot of close-ups of him smoking during the scene, indulging in another bad habit while Sue's trying to do everything to be as perfect and healthy as possible. They offer her the job and she accepts, but explains that she needs every other week off to take care of her sick mother, making up a lie because she's supposed to switch every 7 days. Then Sue struts confidently down the street, a complete difference from how Elisabeth sees walking down the streets of LA as frantic and claustrophobic, trying to cover herself while Sue is just doing a hot girl walk. So Sue's new show gets picked up by the network, and a billboard advertising it is placed directly in front of her high-rise apartment window. Sue gets a whole new wardrobe for herself. On the 5th day, she finally puts a towel under Elisabeth's head. On the 7th day, she has to switch back. So Elisabeth reawakens, seeing Sue for the first time in her old body. She also leaves Sue crumpled on the bathroom floor, showing the disdain both sides have for each other. Back as Elisabeth, she doesn't have much to do. She no longer has her job, but she gets a letter in the mail to get more food matrix for her next switch because that's the only thing that really needs to be refilled by the substance now that she's activated. Because the fluid regenerates from herself, Elisabeth is always the one getting the substance. We never see Sue getting it. And after she gets the food matrix, she spends most of her time just watching TV. And then when we switch back to Sue, she's waking up full of life and energy, ready to take on the day. Interestingly, in this scene where she's stretching in front of the window, the large billboard for her new show isn't there. At first I thought maybe she was looking out a different window in the apartment, but I double checked. You can see the same shelf is against the right wall and the skyline is the same, likely showing that the billboard is just in their head. She sees evidence that Elisabeth has been spending most of her time watching TV. She seems anxious and full of energy and decides to start doing some DIY home improvements, making a vault in the wall of the bathroom to store her other side, and moving the large portrait of Elisabeth out of the living room that was previously facing the billboard. And then we see some filming of Pump It Up with Sue, her new workout show, a sexier, newer version of Elisabeth Sparkle's show with twerking and thrusting and crazy close-ups. Sue even steals Elisabeth's signature kiss blow at the end of her segment.
And in the meantime, take care of yourself.
Although this is only Sue's second week being alive, she's already feeling like her time is more important than Elisabeth's. She puts on a sexy bodysuit for going out at night, and she realizes that Elisabeth is almost done with her food matrix, and Sue tells her,
"Don't eat too fast."
And goes out for a night of partying. Back at the apartment, she's making out with a young hot guy while Elisabeth starts to starve. Sue is overstaying her welcome and starts to bleed from her nose, so she decides to take some extra stabilizer for an 8th day to finish her hookup with this guy. This is when you start to question what's real and what's not, because it seems like some of the parts of her body falling out or bleeding might just be in her head, because it seems like her hookup guy didn't notice she was bleeding. And then we see a shot of basically all of her organs falling out of her back, but that seems to just be a dream that Elisabeth was having. So Elisabeth wakes up and sees the partying and drinking that Sue's been doing, and that her lover left his bike there. Elisabeth is alarmed when she looks at her pointer finger and realizes it looks old and unhealthy and has a yellowing nail, and realizes what Sue took from her. She reaches back out and calls the substance number and asks if her finger can be fixed. She speaks as if Sue's a different person, and the substance operator reminds her that they are one and she needs to respect the balance. But Sue and Elisabeth have a hard time coexisting and accepting the other sides of herself. Elisabeth, now dealing with her deformed finger and having to wear gloves when she's out, sees Sue thriving doing Pump It Up on TV. Elisabeth goes back to the lockers to pick up more of the food matrix. She starts to hear a mysterious, scary noise and flees to a nearby cafe. At the cafe, she runs into the other half of the nurse that gave her the substance flash drive. He is very confrontational and unhinged and scary and starts asking if Sue has been eating away at Elisabeth yet. Elisabeth is terrified that this man followed her and isn't ready to confront what Sue is doing to her, so she flees the cafe. While going back to her apartment, she runs into Sue's hookup from the night before, but he's very mean and aggressive towards Elisabeth, basically seeing her as nothing. At the beginning of the movie, a man on the street recognized Elisabeth and was a fan and also said they went to the same high school. Elisabeth seemed uninterested, but obliges him and asks for his phone number. It seemed like Elisabeth had no intention to call him. Although, after this awkward encounter with Sue's hookup, she decides to rush home and look through her boxes to find the phone number. And she calls Fred and asks if he wants to get a drink with her. She gets all dolled up, but keeps second-guessing her makeup and appearance and outfit. And every time she leaves the bathroom and sees the billboard of Sue through her living room window, she starts to question if she should show her cleavage, so then she covers it with a scarf. She also redoes her makeup, and even with her hand on the door about to leave the apartment, Sue's shadow is too big, and she returns to the bathroom, wipes off all of her makeup and breaks down and stands up Fred on the date. This scene was heartbreakingly relatable for me because I've definitely had those points where you're trying to put on makeup and you just feel like you don't look good enough and you keep trying to like fix it and make it look better, but you just feel so dejected and not beautiful. But Elisabeth has so much hatred and body dysmorphia, and the pressure of living up to Sue is too much, and she basically stops leaving her home as Elisabeth, only going to get the food matrix for Sue. So then we switch back to Sue filming Pump It Up, but when she's recording the show, she feels something odd happen to her butt, and she starts worrying that maybe it's a growth or something. And in a true nightmare scenario, the cast and crew all gather around the monitor to check out what might have happened, and Sue is terrified that it's going to show something odd happen to her body, and she runs away and finds a lump on her side, which she pulls out of her belly button. This is one of the things what I mean where I think this is Sue's hallucination and this didn't really happen, but it's gross nonetheless. Sue, when at her apartment, starts to get disgusted by what Elisabeth is doing, eating lots of meats and junk food and watching TV all day, and resents Elisabeth for having half of her time because she feels like she should have more because Elisabeth isn't making good use of her time like she is. Sue goes to the Pump It Up taping only to realize that it's canceled, and she gets called into the producer's office. Thinking that she might have been found out or her show might be getting canceled, she actually gets offered the spot to host the New Year's Eve network event, which she accepts. Harvey tells Sue that the ratings of Pump It Up are amazing and some of the best they've ever seen, and Sue's about to become the new it girl.
You mean
The network's biggest show, 50 million viewers, live. You can't go higher than that.
After this, Sue continues to overstay her welcome past 7 days, taking extra stabilizer each day after getting more and more opportunities at the height of her new fame, like a Vogue cover. In this time, when Elisabeth awakens, much more of her body is starting to change, like her finger. Now her whole leg is twisted and swollen and has varicose veins, and her hair is turning gray. But realizing what Sue took from her, Elisabeth calls the substance number to complain again. He basically reminds her that they are one and there's nothing he can do, but if she would like, they can stop the experience. And she says no. Knowing how successful Sue is, and maybe part of her feeling satisfaction for Sue's success, even though they're so disconnected, but also maybe a part of her still loves Sue more than she loves herself because her self-hatred goes so deep, and she wishes she has what Sue has in terms of career and youth and beauty, and she decides to continue the experience. When leaving her job, Harvey gave her a French cooking book as a going away present, and she starts to take out her anger through cooking. And when she sees a late night talk show interview with Sue, she is filled with rage and makes disgusting, oily, raw meat meals, while Sue answers questions that would be her answer because she is Sue. But she's so disconnected, she hates Sue. And everything that Sue says in the interview makes her more upset. Definitely a scene that makes me glad I'm a vegetarian and I never have to prepare meats because it was very gross. Movie does such a good job making this visceral, disgusting feeling from Elisabeth cooking these meats to a seemingly innocuous, like, normal late show interview. Elisabeth isn't seeing Sue's win as a win for her, and she's just angry. It only gets worse when the interviewer asks Sue a question about Elisabeth Sparkle, and Sue is unable to give a real compliment to Elisabeth.
I can't really say that I actually watched her show, and you have to admit it was a bit old-fashioned. Jurassic Fitness, really. My mother was a huge fan, so in a way I grew up with her, whether I liked it or not.
The interviewer then asks Sue if she has any beauty secrets. Elisabeth turns her attention to the TV, thinking that Sue is finally going to mention something about her.
Tell them who your little beauty secret is.
I guess I just try to be myself, be sincere and grateful for all that I have, and to always remember to lead with my heart.
And this pushes Elisabeth over the edge, throwing eggs at the screen. She then sees Sue's billboard outside her window and takes newspapers and starts to cover up the window. Elisabeth goes to the bathroom and starts mocking Sue and arguing with herself, starting to have a full mental break. And Elisabeth lies on the floor of the shower, begging for it to stop, hitting her head against the tile. But despite all of this, she still switches back to Sue, and Sue wakes up and sees the mess that she's caused in the apartment, blacking out all of the windows and getting food and ingredients everywhere, and leaving out partially eaten foods. This disgusts Sue so badly she decides that she never wants to be Elisabeth again. So she decides to take lots of mason jars into the bathroom and take as much stabilizer fluid as possible from Elisabeth, making Elisabeth's back wound worse and worse every time. But Sue doesn't care because she hates Elisabeth so much, and she hates that she's fat and old and ugly. So she spends 3 months as Sue, leaving Elisabeth in her bathroom to rot, basically. She does leave her with food matrices, but she's not really taking care of her, cleaning them up. So it's the day before the New Year's Eve show, and Sue's finally going to have her big moment in the spotlight, feeling proud of her success. She also has a boyfriend who's staying with her at the apartment, and it seems like every trace of Elisabeth has been removed. But at the end of the day, Sue goes to inject some stabilizer fluid. Sue realizes that she's out of stabilizer fluid and goes to the vault to get more from Elisabeth, but what she withdraws is just pus and basically no stabilizer fluid left. She panics and calls the substance number, asking what she can do because there's no stabilizer fluid left. The substance operator explains to her that the only way to get more stabilizer fluid is the switching on and off process. While the other self is awake, they can regain stabilizer fluid that then Sue could take, and that's the only way that she can get more fluid. Sue breaks down because she is disgusted by Elisabeth and doesn't want to switch back to her, but she starts to have vertigo and fall over and have her nose and ears bleed. And especially with her big New Year's Eve event the next day, she knows though that she has to switch now so she could switch back tomorrow, because if she doesn't, she's going to die. So Sue ultimately does decide to switch back to Elisabeth. Now Elisabeth has changed so much, she's almost unrecognizable after 3 months of neglect. All parts of her body are deformed and changed. Elisabeth calls the substance number again, struggling to walk and move with her new body. She calls and finally asks for the experience to stop. She's had enough and she can't deal with Sue anymore. And they confirm that they'll deliver the termination injection. Despite all of the trouble Elisabeth has walking and moving, she decides to pull the portrait of herself back into the living room after Sue removed it. This was the version of herself she hated so much on her 50th birthday that she decided to get the substance, but now she's completely unrecognizable less than a year later from how she looked. So she rushes to her locker to get the termination fluid and preps to inject it into Sue. It's a completely black liquid that Elisabeth injects into her chest, While doing it, she continues to second guess herself, even though Sue has taken so much from her. But while Elisabeth is injecting the termination fluid into her, she keeps second guessing and glancing around at Sue's face, and then finally looks back over to the bouquet of roses saying break a leg, realizes she can't go through with terminating Sue, especially after Sue's about to have her big break, which is what Elisabeth always wanted, the praise and admiration from the audience, and that's what Sue's going to get tonight on the New Year's Eve show. So she gives Sue about 80% of the fluid before stopping and realizing she needs Sue. Sue has her chance to have everyone love her and see her beauty, and Elisabeth admits that she hates herself.
I need you. Because I hate myself.
So Elisabeth starts to try to resuscitate Sue, but she continues to bleed. So she decides to do the only thing she can think of and switch back. But when she switches back, Sue wakes up, but Elisabeth is still awake, and they see each other face to face for the first time, which shouldn't be able to happen, but maybe because they've never truly been one, that they broke the experience. Sue sees that Elisabeth was trying to terminate her, and she, without remorse and without hesitation, starts to try to murder Elisabeth. This is when the movie gets really gross and crazy and bloody. Sue is filled with so much hatred and rage for her older self, for aging and no longer being beautiful, that she doesn't care if Elisabeth survives. Even though she needs Elisabeth's stabilizer fluid to survive, she still doesn't care and is filled with rage and murders Elisabeth. She feels a part of herself die too and grieves the death of Elisabeth. But then when she looks out the window to see the billboard for the New Year's event, she knows what will make her feel better, what she needs to do. Get ready for her big event. She goes to the studio and starts getting dressed up, but then she goes to the bathroom and starts coughing out teeth, and then for some reason pulling them out, and it's a lot. Sue's starting to break down, and she gets this idea that the only way she can be beautiful and better again is by taking the substance activator again. Because what if Sue is split into a new, more beautiful, more perfect version of herself? She runs into the studio executives, trying to force a smile, and they seem unaware that things are not going well for her. The studio executives are a group of elderly white men, a bit on the nose, but they live in a pretty cartoony world, so it makes sense. While she's running home to reactivate the substance, more body parts start to fall off along the way, like her nails and one of her ears. Horrible. In this point in the movie, I started thinking about how much selfishness and self-hatred Elisabeth has, that she was never able to accept both versions of herself, even at the first switch, basically. They only did 1 week on and off before things started to go badly. Even though Sue and Elisabeth need each other, they never tried to get along and have a partnership or any cooperation, even if they didn't like each other. Elisabeth always switched back to Sue week after week, even though she felt like she hated her, but it was truly Sue's problem not being able to accept the Elisabeth side of herself that ended up killing her, because she felt like she was so gross and disgusting and useless. Even though she can't survive without her, she'd rather do that than live with her. And she thinks that she can split herself again to fix the problem, but not realizing she has basically nothing left because she's only a half of a whole at this point. The substance says single use all over it. This time, Sue births a new her from her spine, but it does not go well, and she births a monster. Monster elisasue, a similar replication of what happened last time, where the monster's birthed from her spine and she has multiple eyeballs in her eyeball, and it's crazy and gross. So it seems Sue is dead, and Monster Elisasue starts getting ready for the New Year's event, and it's really gross. She has a crazy body with lots of faces, lots of different body parts everywhere, uneven, and she tries to put on a dress and makeup and accessories, but her body is so different from how it used to be. And Elisasue cuts out the picture of the Elisabeth portrait in the living room and puts it on like a mask, and decides to go to the New Year's ball that way. Cartoonishly, the people at the studio don't immediately seem to notice, but we do get some scenes, or it seems like Elisasue is hallucinating the kind of praise and attention she hopes and wishes she'll receive when she gets there. So she gets on stage, and once the paper mask falls off, the theater is silent. Then some gross body horror stuff happens because her body is continuing to like change and morph and grow, and someone gets up and screams, and then the theater erupts into chaos. Monster Elisasue starts getting attacked by all of the men, and she continues to change and grow, getting new body parts. She also breaks her arm in this battle, and it starts spewing blood like a hose to everyone in the room. This part is very hard to watch. This is basically the end where everything just gets absurd and crazy and really gross because the brawl continues, but now blood is everywhere. Elisasue rushes out of the event, but trips and falls on the street and breaks apart into millions of different pieces and organs. But her head is still alive, so she drags what's left of her body to the Hollywood star, where she dies. RIP. But before she dies, she envisions people giving her the love and praise and attention that she wanted before melting. And then the next day, the street cleaner comes to wipe her remains off of Elizabeth Sparkle's star. And that's The Substance. A really fun sci-fi concept of body switching, very stylistic and interesting shots, lots of liminal feeling spaces like the stark all-white tile bathroom with no mats or anything. The story is very contained because there's only a few locations we see Sue or Elisabeth go to, like the studio, her apartment, getting the substance, and walking between those places. There's also some repetitive shots, like we often see the palm trees facing towards the sky, or Elisabeth in the morning taking a shower. A pretty straightforward commentary on how vapid and vain the entertainment industry is, and commenting on ageism in the search for eternal beauty. The music and sound effects are designed to put you on edge and make you cringe and feel gross, but it does a good job at that. I do love the concept of The Substance, but in a way I wish it wasn't a horror movie. I understand why it is, because it's trying to show the self-destruction of taking a drug like The Substance. Because I'm thinking it could have been like a drama sci-fi where she learns to love herself. That's how I probably would have written it. But this movie is showing the worst case scenario for someone like Elisabeth. She's insecure and feels horrible about aging and her 50th birthday, and she's on a quest for beauty, and in the process, and her quest for beauty and youth completely destroys herself and dies. That level of self-hatred, body dysmorphia is terrifying, but not completely unbelievable. Because what I started to think about all the experimental procedures and things that celebrities do for youth and for beauty, all the products and things that are pushed for these things, to me it's not completely unbelievable that someone would take the substance, and it's also not unbelievable that people would have trouble switching back every other week. Because even though both Elisabeth and the mysterious nurse were told all the rules of the substance and how you must switch every 7 days, we see both of them ignored the warnings. And you can see it both ways, as her hating the aging part of herself as Sue and being disgusted by that, but also if her and Sue are not thinking as one, Sue still hated Elisabeth for being old and for overindulging in food and for just watching TV every day. She resented everything that Elisabeth was doing, even though Elisabeth was switching back every 7 days like the agreement was. So I've been thinking about this movie on and off a lot since I saw it, and because it's so thought-provoking, that's why it's my best picture. Of course, if you're looking for a fun movie to watch, I'd probably recommend Wicked. Probably not Anora unless you know that there's lots of sex scenes in the movie. So be prepared for that, depending on who you watch it with. I'm still trying to actually unpack Anora and Wicked. I would love to hear what your best picture is for 2024, and if it's one of the Oscar nominations or a completely different movie. I think it's important to remember with award shows like the Oscars and the Grammys, they are celebrating a portion of the industry, but it's not encapsulating the entire industry. So I'm sure there's some amazing movies that have come out in 2024 that are just completely being snubbed at the Oscars. So I'd love to hear your take. Have a good day, and don't take the substance.